Hello everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel, M Stuart Paintings. On today's acrylic painting tutorial, we're going to paint this gorgeous autumn fall landscape. I'm going to teach you how to use a fan brush to create realism in things like leaves in an underpainting, how to create gaps in your sky to create the illusion of trees with a nice transition in colour. We're going to teach you how to do branches and bark in your trees, and you can paint this gorgeous autumn fall landscape painting. So let's get into it. Now the colours we're going to use today are titanium white, cad yellow deep hue, cad orange light, matte crimson, pastel lime green, chromium oxide green, cerulean blue, which I've left off, cobalt blue, Irish purple, burnt sienna, burnt umber brown and black. So here we've got a burnt sienna canvas, and all I've drawn is a rough outline with some chalk. I'm going to have a large tree in the foreground, I'm going to have a couple of medium-sized trees, and we're going to have the sunlight at the end of the path just bang in the middle. So if anyone would like to copy down the outline, feel free to do so, but all I'm going to do, just so you can see it and it makes the outline look a bit more realistic, so you can all copy it down. You can always pause the video once I've put the blue in. I'm just using cobalt blue. The reason I use cobalt blue is I just block in where I want all the main shadows to be and all the main construct of my painting. So I'm going to have a little hedge here. I'm doing a nice sort of full country path, just kind of doing out my imagination. I'm just kind of thinking we can have a nice central tree line. We can have a big tree in the foreground, and then we can have some little trees either side of it. And what I can do is teach you all how to do some trees, and also I can teach you how to make full colours. Don't worry if you don't have all those colours on the list. I know it's an awful lot of colours and not everyone all around the world has access to all these paints and colours. I will teach you as we go along how to make paint colours. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just creating a rough outline, so if anyone wants to copy it down, feel free to do so. So I'm just using dark blue, just cobalt blue, just to put in all the shadows where I want things to be. So nice and easy, nothing hard. We're just darkening up our corners like always, because we're going to have all the light right at the end of the path in the middle. So I've got a round headed large brush, and what I'm going to teach you first, we're going to start right at the back. I'm going to teach you how to create a light effect. So the first thing I'm going to do is just blob a big splat for our sun of titanium white, and we're just going to create a big sort of sunlight, and we're going to add a little bit of cad yellow to some titanium white, just a dot of cad yellow to titanium white, and we're just going to get this sort of creamy off-white which has got a hint of yellow, so just add a dot of yellow to a big blob of white, and all we're doing, we're just creating a little bit warmer tone around our sun. Now we want to create darker shade around the sun, so we're just going to get some white, and we're going to add a little dot of that cool purple. Now if you haven't got that cool purple at home, cobalt blue and purple and a little bit of white and a dot of black, you can make it. So cobalt blue, little dot of purple, some white and a dot of black, and you can make it. So all I've done there is added a tiny bit of purple to some white. So I've got some of that cool purple but predominantly white, and all I'm doing, I'm just making almost like a really pastel lavender colour. I'm just blending it as we go up. So if you imagine the sun's white, and just around it, it's got sort of a hum of yellow, so it's got this light sort of yellow sort of aspect, and then as the sky gets cooler, as it goes higher up into the sky, we've just using a light purple but is predominantly white to get a nice colour. Now if you mix these two colours together, which is cerulean blue and cobalt blue, so a little dot of cerulean blue and a little dot of cobalt blue, and you add plenty of white, you get this very light pastel blue if I apply it to the canvas. So cerulean blue and cobalt blue. Sorry I left cerulean blue off the list, but cerulean blue and cobalt blue. And all we're going to do, if you imagine the light source is in the middle and it's getting cooler either side and cooler as the painting goes up, so all we're doing, we're just mixing that in, and we're just going to block it in. So all we've got is a cooler tone either side of our sun, a nice yellow hue around it, and then some light purpley white. And then if you can just dry your work with a hairdryer, we'll just reapply the exact same colours, and we'll just try to get some of the streaks out and just make it look a lot neater. So it's white first, we're going to get white and a dot of yellow to get the next colour. So just add a dot of yellow to your white, so you've got this light creamy Naples yellow almost colour. So you can add even a dot of black, just a dot, like a pinprick, just to desaturize it. So white, plenty of white, dot of yellow and a dot of black. And then to get this lavender colour, it was just cobalt blue and a little bit of purple, some white and a dot of black, and then just mix tons and tons of white with that, and you'll get this very light purple. I've still got some yellow on my brush, and that's okay, it doesn't really matter, because we're just going to all blend it together. So I'm just going to add more purple to the mix. So basically you're just trying to get cooler. So by using purple, what the great thing about using a light lavender tone, from yellow to blue will make green. So if you use a really light lavender tone, you can just cheat and you can't get a horrible green sky. So next, if we get cerulean blue and cobalt blue, just mix the two together and add tons and tons and tons of white, and you should get this lovely little pastel blue. You can again just add a dot of black to your mix, and that will just suck out a bit of the colour. But black is very overpowering, so when I mean a dot, I literally mean a pinprick, like a dot. So look, there we go, we've got this nice transition in our sky, we've worked out all our streaks, and we've got this nice light effect at the end of the path, just so it looks really pretty. So we're going to swap over to a fan brush, and please dry your sky before we add yellow. So to get this yellow tone and this light green, I'm going to teach you. So to get that yellow, you just add cad yellow, plenty of white, but predominantly cad yellow. So cad yellow and plenty of white. And then to get this light green, you just mix cad yellow and the chromium oxide green and some white, and you should get that light green. But plenty of yellow in either one. So very lots of cad yellow and a little bit of white, and you should get this lovely colour. And all I'm going to do is use a fan brush just to create shapes of leaves and foliage and hedges and bushes. So all I'm doing, I'm just using bright yellow. Now the reason we're using bright yellow is because the sun is extremely bright, and that's at the end of our path, it's going to cascade really nice bright highlights at the end of the path. And what it does is it gives a central focus for the viewer at home to look at something. So it's almost like they're walking down that path towards the sunlight. So what we want to do is we just want to take the corner of our fan brush and we just want to make little splats. Now don't worry if you cover up a lot of the background sky, because I'm going to teach you later on how to poke holes in your sky and to make your sky look really realistic. Now to get this lime pastel green, you can either buy it, obviously it's just lime pastel green, or you can just mix cad yellow, tiny bit of the chromium oxide green, and lots of white. And all it is just, if you think of a bright sort of lime green, but it's got plenty of white and yellow in it, just to give it that bright. And all I'm doing, I'm just using it just to create some bright highlights around these lighter tones. So what we're trying to do is just create a really bright sun, and I'm just going to get some of the chromium oxide green, mix a tiny bit of the more pastel tone, so I'm just adding a bit of white, and I'm going to add some cad orange light. Now cad orange light is a pumpkin colour. We were using it previously on the last tutorial, and all I'm going to do is just make a nice greeny sort of warm green texture of a big bush or trees. So these are all sort of bushes and trees in the foreground, and all I'm going to do is use that colour just to sort of frame the painting and come up, and these are all sort of leaves and branches, bushes in the foreground. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm just going to kind of mirror, because I want to try to make the transitions go from hot to cold. So I'm going to get some of the chromium oxide green. God, that's such a big word. And I'm going to add some orange. I'm going to add a tiny bit of burnt umber, and I'm going to add some cobalt blue. So burnt umber and cobalt blue and a little bit of orange. And I'm just going to put a darker shade of green, just a little bit of darker shade, but it's still got some orange in it, and it's still got some burnt umber just to make it a little bit darker. And I'm just going to block in sort of some grass. That's all I'm doing with that sort of dark warm green. I'm just going to block in sort of a lawn, sort of a nice sort of country park. So all I'm going to do is just block this in. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to create the underpainting, and we're trying to use nice shadow tones and highlights, and then what we're going to do is put all the detail on top. So all we're doing right at the beginning, all this scruffy stage, it's a bit like the last tutorial we just did with the birch trees. We're trying to put all the foundation on, and then we'll put the detail like the branches over the top. So we're just going to add more cobalt blue to the mix and more burnt umber. So we're making it more earthy and dark. So as we come towards the viewer, obviously we're getting further away from the sunlight, so it's going to be dark and cooler. We're going to add a tiny bit of burnt sienna into the mix, a little bit more green because we still want it predominantly green. And we're going to make this really earthy dark green, and we're just going to frame the painting. So all we're doing, we're making our corners nice and dark because obviously they're furthest away from the sun, so they're going to be in the shade more. And they're going to be cooler in temperature, but also what that does is it just frames the painting and brings the foreground towards the viewer. So little trick, easy peasy, just by framing with a darker colour, you can just make your work look more realistic. So that's starting to look cool. Now we're going to get that light yellow that we made just previously, and we're just going to load up our fan brush, and now that background is dry, we're just going to go over it just a tiny bit just because it's a bit scruffy, and we're just going to put some more texture into our leaves. So there we go. Just add a few more leaves. So this was the golden colour that we were predominantly using for our last tutorial with those lovely birch trees. So what we're trying to do is we're going to try to create really nice bright light around our sun, and then we're going to get more autumny, so we're going to use more things like orange and yellows and crimson. So we've got this cad yellow deep hue, and we're going to add some of the cad orange light. So cad deep hue, cad yellow deep hue, which is like a golden colour. We're going to add a tiny bit of burnt umber to the mix and a tiny bit of our green, and we're just going to create this sort of yellow ochre sort of colour. So we're going to add a dot of black, just a dot, and a little bit more of that cad yellow deep hue. There we go, that's a really lovely goldeny autumn colour. And we're going to swap over to our fan brush again. Now the fan brush, they're super cheap, as I was mentioning in the previous tutorial. They are wonderful for creating texture and leaves and foliage. So they are brilliant for creating realistic trees and bushes. So just load up your fan brush. I tend to use just a little corner of the fan brush, and I just tap it onto the canvas because it's all spiky and it's got all lots of rough bristles. What that does is it leaves lots of little gaps. Because you've got lots of bits of the underpainting shining through, it just gives the impressions of texture on your leaves. So really easy technique. Now as I say, don't worry if you cover a lot of your background sky. I'm going to teach you towards the end how to poke holes and create realism. What we're trying to do is work on the transition. We want to go from the really bright yellow in the back to sort of goldeny colours, to oranges, to dark browns. So we're working on the transition of the sunlight on our bushes and trees. So all I'm doing, I'm just using a little brush, I'm just making splats. So I'm just trying to create far away bushes and using that bright yellow that's in the background just to push that right back so it looks like the sun's coming over it and it's shining through. So just by using a lot of paint, you can create big splats, and by using a tiny amount you can create little leaves. So really easy. As I say, we're just trying to work on the texture and the colour. So a great thing to invest in is something like a colour wheel, where you have like yellows to oranges to browns or to greens. So we're trying to match that. So we're trying to get a little bit darker. So by adding some of that cad orange light and a bit of crimson. So we're adding a tiny bit of crimson. We're trying to create all these lovely autumn fall colours. So now we've got sort of these rusty leaf colour. So I wanted to do a bit more of an orange tutorial, seeing we did a yellow golden colour last time. So we're going to swap over to our fan brush again, and we're just going to get darker. So as I say, we're just trying to work on the transitions from the really bright yellow, and we're getting darker, more orange and more rustic as we move either side of the centre. So same technique over and over and over again. And because we've got that lovely under colour, that sort of green, we can create the illusion of bushes. So we're just trying to create the illusion of big faraway bushes. So just like in the previous tutorial, it's pretty tedious. It's pretty like just go back and forth, but it's not hard. It's not difficult to do. The brush does all the work for you. So look, by just changing angles, you can get different shapes. Just splat it onto the canvas and you can get lots of different shapes. And as I was saying in the previous tutorial, you can use such things as a sponge if you don't have a fan brush. But fan brush, literally, they are super cheap to buy. So they're worthy investment, because they're literally about $1 or a pound. So I'm going to mix some orange. I've got a little brighter shade of orange, which is matte orange. And I'm going to add some green to it. I'm going to add a tiny bit of burnt umber. Now orange and green always create brown. So I've got a very nice tanny brown. So it's predominantly orange with a little bit of green. And it's just a bit darker. So same technique. So as I keep saying to you, and what we're doing, we're just trying to get a nice transition in all the leaves. So we've got this dark transition in the leaves from really bright yellow to more autumny colours, some more oranges and browns and crimsons. So look, all we're doing, just try and add texture, going over and over again. It's nice and relaxing when you're actually doing it. So when you're doing it, it's just nice to put some music and chill and just create some lovely trees and bushes. So as I say, don't worry if you cover up a lot of your sky. We'll poke some holes in a minute. I'll teach you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next colour. So we're getting some burnt sienna. So we're getting more rusty, and we're getting some crimson and a dot of black. So burnt sienna, which was the colour of our canvas, crimson, a dot of black, and a little bit of cobalt blue just to make it more plum colour. So it's still very brown, but it's getting a bit more purpley, a bit darker. And we're going to load up the fan brush again, do the exact same technique. So we're just bringing some of these bushes into the foreground. We're just creating some nice texture. And as I say, don't worry if it's scruffy. You have to go through this scruffy stage to get to the detail stage. But what we're trying to do is we're just trying to create the illusion of detail in the far distance, just to create realism. So working on the transitions and using tones, we can create a lot more realistic work very quickly. And then, as I keep saying to you, as you work on your detail and you start studying your work, you can work on precisely how everything goes. But by learning all these brush techniques and color techniques, you can really cheat almost and really do realistic work. So last, we're going to get very dark color now. We're going to get black, burnt sienna, and some cobalt blue. So black, cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and a little bit of that green, a little bit more cobalt blue and black. Let's to make a really dark tone. Load up the fan brush for the last time, and we're going to make this really dark shadow tone, and just in the corners I'm going to frame the painting and create a really dark tone. And these are all the bits that are cooler in tone, all the bits of leaves and trees that are cooler in tone because they're not getting as much sunlight, and they're darker in tone and they're darker in colour. So we've got this lovely light effect in the middle that draws you down, but it's too bushy. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a tiny bit of cobalt blue just to that mix, and while I've got that colour, it's perfect for shadows. So almost going to create a little bit of a off silhouette. I'm going to create my hedge, and I'm going to use it just to poke some far away tree trunks. So these could be some tree trunks off in the far distance. And I'm just going to use it at the bottom of our painting just to frame the composition. So I'm using that really dark shadow tone that we just mixed up. I added a tiny bit of cobalt blue, and I'm just going to use it as a shadow. Now I'm going to have this side a little bit darker because we've got that hedge. Let's have this side a little bit darker so it's a bit more in the shade than the left hand side. Now I'm going to swap to a smaller brush, and I'm going to load up the colour we made for the sky. So do you remember it was cerulean blue and a bit of cobalt blue and predominantly white. And all I'm going to do, if I swap for an even smaller brush, I'm going to create little holes in the sky to create the illusion of gaps, to create more realism, to make it look like lots of leaves and branches in the distance. So just by going back and getting the same colour that you mixed for your sky at the beginning and swapping to a very small headed brush and just taking your time, just relaxing and just popping lots of little holes, you can create the illusion of far away trees and branches. And what this does is it just makes your work look much more realistic. And the great thing is rather than trying to spend hours trying to work on every single leaf, because we've done the trick with the fan brush and we've worked all that texture and we've worked on the transition of colours by popping all these splats and little holes in the background, what will happen is once we have finished, all the transitions will look supernatural and all the detail, and by adding all these little holes it will trick the viewer's eyes and make it look super realistic. So a really easy tip and trick is to do all the fan brush and all the texture and then go back and then just pop holes in your sky rather than worry about trying to match every single leaf and spend hours and hours. It's up to you if you really want to do that. This is a very quick way to cheat and to put the sky back in to create realism. So it's a really quick and easy trick, and because we've got that lovely gradient where we've got the golden bright highlights around the sun, and now we're putting in the little gaps, and we've got the really dark outer colour, what it should be doing is starting to trick the eye and it starts to look more and more realistic. And then in a minute we're going to start putting some branches and some faraway trees in the background to match the colour, and it will start looking really realistic very shortly. So just going through the scruffy stage and then poking some holes through just to create a little bit more sky and a little bit more realism, you can paint something that looks really texturized very, very quickly. So as I say, just take your time with it, just put in lots of little holes. So again, just like the fan brush, it's not hard, it just takes time. So just relax and just poke little holes. And the great thing about acrylics is if you poke too many holes, you can always just literally go back and just put in the colour that you use for the trees just to fill it back in. So I'm going to take some of that cad yellow deep hue, so that golden yellow, and I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to the mix. So a little bit more, I think, a little bit darker. And I'm going to add some of this cool iris purple just to make it nice and earthy. That looks gorgeous. A little bit of cobalt blue. And I'm going to swap brushes to a really long tipped fine liner. So look at how long this tip is on this paintbrush. And all I'm going to do is load it up. So I've got a really thin fine liner. So again, these are about $1 in the paint shops, in the art shops. And I'm going to create a tree trunk. So it's far away. And I've got this really pin-like brush, so I can create really spindly branches and tree trunks. So it makes my job again really easy just by having the right brush. So rather than using a thick brush and I get a big splodge, my tree's too wide and it looks rubbish, by using a better brush but using the colours that match, I can create far away trees. And because we're using a colour that is nice and warm, what it looks like again is that it's in the sunlight. So it looks like those tree branches and the tree trunk are picking up the sunlight, and because it's close to the sun, it's warm in tone and it all matches. So again, by working on your transitions, you can create realism, not through much detail, but through the colours, through the tones. So see how it's tricking your eyes? So it looks like those trees are in the sun, and it's just from using warm tones around the sunlight. So we're going to use some bright orange, and we're going to add some purple to the mix. So matte orange is just extremely bright orange, and we're just going to add some purple to the mix. And all I'm going to do, just with a little brush, I'm just going to poke some holes and just make my bushes just a bit more orange, a bit more autumn-like. So if I zoom in for you guys, you can see what I'm doing a bit more close up. All I'm doing, I'm leaving gaps in the underpainting, and I'm using bright orange with a little bit of purple. So look, bright orange, and we're going to take a little bit of purple just to cool it down, just so it's not so cartoony. So but just adding a little bit of purple, it just sucks a bit of the colour out and it just makes it a little bit more earthy. So if I do it on this side, look, all I'm doing is just little splodges. I'm leaving gaps just to create, oops, just gonna splodge that. No one will notice, use my finger. So all I'm doing, look, I'm leaving gaps, and I'm just trying to create a more bright orangey tone. I really want to make it a nice full landscape. I want to make it look more autumny. So by using yellows and oranges, that really creates that. And remember, acrylics always dry a little bit darker. So by using really bright tones just by the sun, I want it to really draw the viewer's eyes so they look right down the middle. So look, all I'm doing, I'm leaving little gaps, and again it's just to imply texture and to imply bushes. Obviously we're going to have these trees in the foreground, which is going to hide a lot of this, but it's just, again, it's just spending 2 minutes just adding extra detail, all these little tricks, just to make the work look more realistic. So again, it's all with colours, all with the tones. Look at that. So we've got this lovely light effect. I missed a bit here, so just add that really quick. There we go. Okay, so that's looking excellent. So we've got our far off trees, and we want to get darker as we move further away from the sun and closer to the viewer. So how do we do that? We add black and cobalt blue and some burnt sienna just to warm it back up, because we don't want it too dark a tone. So we want black, cobalt blue and a bit of burnt sienna, and we're going to make a warm dark brown, so a warm dark bluey brown. I'm going to swap to a flat headed brush, which is like a flat headed screwdriver. It's just got a completely flat edge, and because of that I can again just do a nice big tree in the foreground. So if you think of these trees, they're not quite silhouetted, so we don't want to make them jet black. That's why I've got a bit of burnt sienna, a bit of blue in them. And also if you have them jet black, it will bring it really forward towards the viewer. So what I'm doing, I'm creating nice flat lines. I'm creating a bit wider at the base of my tree than at the top. And I'm just using, as I say, a flat-headed brush. I'm just turning it sideways to create a little bit of shadow. I'm coming down, just create a nice branch. So there we go. Let's create a little Y-shaped one. Let's have a nice Y-shaped one. And over here, let's have one just here in the foreground. So again, look, the colours are pushing the ones nearer the sun back and darker ones are bringing it forward. Now I'm going to add more black to the mix, and I'm going to put this big bad boy right here. So this is going to be our nearest tree, so that's why it's a bit darker, because it's closer towards the viewer and it's also further away from the sun. And I'm just going to make a huge tree trunk here on the left. So here we go. So what I'm doing, just blocking in a nice big tree, and I'm just going to use this as a shadow tone, and we'll put things like bark and detail over the top in a minute. But what I want to do is I want to create branches. So I'm going to just go back to that previous colour. So I'm just going to add a bit more blue to the mix. I'm going to make it less dark by adding blue and burnt sienna again. So I'm creating this nice warm dark bluey brown. And I'm going to swap back to my really thin fine liner. So I'm back, I'm going to load her up with that colour. And just like we did with the far off trees, by using a really fine brush, you can create really nice spindly branches. So you can create much more realism just by using the correct brush. So unlike the big flat brush, sometimes it will create too big branches, and I want some branches to be quite thin and quite long in length. So by using that dark colour and going back to my really fine liner, I can just cheat. So I can just make realism. And what I'm doing, I'm creating some branches and some that I'm just leaving gaps, almost looking like they're popping out of the leaves. And again, it should trick the viewer's eyes and just create realism. So look, all I'm doing, just make sure when you're using a fine liner, I was saying this in the previous tutorial, just make sure you wet the fine liner so it's nice and wet before you load up the paint. So when you stroke it on the canvas, because the canvas is nice and texturized, if it's too dry, it won't flow nice and smooth, and you'll get little ridges where you're painting the branches. So if you have a nice wet brush, yeah, plenty of paint, you can create these really smooth branches in one go. So it's really, really easy to do. So look, now we're adding the detail on top, because we've got that lovely texture and that lovely gradient and colour. It's starting to trick the eye and starting to look really realistic in such a short period of time. As I say, none of these techniques are hard. So look, there you go. My brush was pretty dry. So you see there, it didn't go all the way down. So by just adding more water to your brush, you can get much more free flowing. So look, there's me dabbing it in water, just so it's nice and free flowing. There we go. Look at that. Just creating little spindly branches, some coming off either side, just to create the realism. And now all those branches back towards the sun, it's pushing it back, it's creating that 3D look. So at the end of the path, it looks like the sun's beaming out. So really cool, really easy. Oh, she's so pretty already. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So we're going to take some bright yellow and some green, so some cad yellow and that chromium oxide green. And we're going to add a little bit of orange to the mix, and we're just going to make a sort of off orangey yellow sort of lime colour. So think of a colour of a lime, and all this grass in the background is going to get some sunlight, so it's going to be very bright. And while we've got that colour, why not let's create the shadow and the highlights for our path. Now I was going to do lots of things like silhouettes on the grass of all the trees and all the branches, but I thought that'd be way too complicated and the picture would take literally 3 hours. So I thought it's too much. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to have a nice light effect on the branch, and I'm going to teach you how to do texture on things like your grass and things like that. So I'm going to get some cobalt blue and some iris purple. a little bit of black and a little bit of orange. So a tiny bit of black and a little bit of orange, just to make a really nice warm grey. So this is this colour I've got pre-mixed. So purple, orange, blue and a dot of black, and you can make this nice warm grey. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to use that for a shadow tone. So again, this is the highlights that are not quite in the sun, a little bit of shade, but it's still a nice warm colour, hence the fact it's got orange in it with the blue, and it creates a nice sort of shadow tone of bits that are getting some shade and some cool tones. So there we go, just using that colour just to frame that area. And let's get some matte orange. So as I said before, matte orange is just bright orange. We're just going to mix that into the mix. And I'm going to swap over to my fan brush. So it's still got a tiny bit of purple in that, so it's just a little bit off orange. And I'm going to create sort of leaves and texture along grass by using the fan brush. So all I'm doing is I'm tipping my fan brush so it's sideways. And I'm doing the exact same technique as we did with the branches, if I just move my fingers in a minute. And I'm leaving lots of gaps in the underpainting to create the illusion of texture. So these could be all loose leaves and bits of grass on the nice. And again, we're trying to match the tones and match the colours, so that's why we want to use the oranges. And also these, because the path is kind of illuminated, where the path is where the sunlight is coming down it, we want to have the brightest highlights, so we want the bright oranges right down the path. And again, it just gives the viewer something to focus on. It gives the viewer something in the center to look like they're walking down that path. So look, all I'm doing, I'm just printing the brush, getting the brush to do all my work. Don't worry if you go a bit over your trees, we can just paint them back over with the same tones. So all we're trying to do is create texture in our grass, and to have the look of like fallen leaves and bits of grass poking through. Now we're going to add some crimson to the mix. So just get some big dollop of crimson, mix it into our orange, a little bit of cobalt blue just to make it more purpley. So there we go, a little bit of the purple, a little bit more orange just to make it more brown. So there we go. So we've got this musty brown, a little bit of black. So again, it's just a darker tone of orange. We're going to add a little bit more green just to make it more brown. So there we go. And we're going to do the exact same technique. So just think of what we just did with the faraway trees, with the foliage, and also with the trees. Because we're more in the shade, we want to create highlights, but we want them to be more dark and earthy in tone. So by using this dark sort of purpley brown, we can still do the exact same technique, just like we did with the orange. So all we're doing, we're just printing the illusion of texture on our grass. But now this is more in the shade and it's further from the sun. So we're doing the exact same technique. So we're trying to make our grass look cooler and just make all our transitions match. So just like we did with the faraway trees, we're just trying to get it to match with our grass. So just by adding more blue and black and burnt sienna to the mix, we can make it even darker, and we can just paint back all around our hedge. So do you remember we did the same colour for the hedge? So I'm just going to make it a bit more bobbly, a bit more realistic. You never see a straight hedge unless someone's cropped it, so in a park you never see it. And just going to do the bottom of these trees. Just put a bit of shadow here on the path. So all I'm trying to do is try and make the colours look realistic. So we've got that warm grey. I'm going to just cool it down with a bit of purple and mix that into the colour. So I'm just making it a little bit cooler. So if you want to cool things in tones to create shadows, you can use blues and purples. And if you want to heat things up like they're in the sunlight, use things like orange and yellows and things like reds. So I'm just going to get that really bright yellow that we had in the mix which was cad yellow and white. And all I'm going to do is just start adding the highlights on top. Now, as I say, I was going to do really streaky light effect, but I think it would be a bit too much on this tutorial. I think it would be a bit overwhelming. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to teach you about highlights in the foreground, and we're going to do some fallen leaves. So we'll still have some really nice highlights and shadows, but we won't have all these shadows from the trees and silhouettes, because I think it would just be a bit overwhelming. So we're going to get some of that off white, which was just predominantly white with a dot of yellow. So predominantly white with a dot of yellow. And again, we're just trying to create the light effect that matches all our transitions. So we're just shining down. I'm going to get some of that dark shadow tone. A little bit more black to it. And just going to put some shadows coming around here. See, I was in two minds. I was thinking, look, let's do sort of silhouettes of all the trees, but then I was trying to work out, haven't really got a reference photo, which way would the sun be coming? I'd have to do it for every single tree. That would be long. So I thought, why not just rub it out? And a great thing about acrylics, as I keep saying to you, is you can just paint over it. So there's never a mistake, as Bob Ross would say, only happy accidents. So all I've done is just literally just faded it out. There could be one. There could be the one that got away. So there we go. Just painting over it with the same colour, and no one would notice unless I told you. So easy trick. But again, if you wanted to, you could do that. So I'm going to get some of that cad orange light and a little bit of purple, just a tiny bit of purple. So I've got this really nice warm orange, and I'm going to get my fan brush, and now that the painting is a little bit drier, I'm just going to go around the path and heat it up. So just again, this is the areas that are getting the most sunlight, so I want to create the illusion of fallen leaves and that sort of rusty autumn fall colour. So to make our landscape look nice and realistic, all I'm doing is using again the same tones over and over and over again. And the great thing is everyone can relate to this time of year. You'll know what it's like. I love this time of year with the sort of orange trees and all the fallen leaves. It's gorgeous. So just by warming it up, just by using this cad orange light and a hint of purple, and I'm just going to add some more orange and some more purple, but a bit more purple this time. So again, just the same technique, using the fan brush. Because we've got a little bit more purple, it's a little bit darker. So as we go away from the path and we go more into the shade, we're just making it a bit more cooler using that cool purple. So again, same technique, we're just leaving gaps in the underpainting to create the illusion of texture. So by just using a slightly darker tone, it looks like the light is fading off. So just going right up. So see how that works? And then we're just getting a little bit darker, so we're going to add some black. And I'm just going to, while it's still wet, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of black to the corners and just push down and imprint the illusion of grass. So there we go. So again, it's just to create the illusion of grass and texture. Just using some black. Because the painting is still quite wet, it's mixing in with the other colours and it's not too dark. So I'm just trying to print it and create texture in the foreground, just to bring the foreground nearer to the viewer. So just by using black, to bringing it closer. So again, it's just the same technique, but just obviously a darker colour. Just letting the paint run off my brush just to create texture. So I'm just going to mix some black, some cobalt blue and some green just to create a dark musty green. And again, I'm just, as I move towards the sunlight, I don't want to use black, I want to just use a little bit dark tone that's not too overwhelming. So I'm just using this really dark green, and I'm just going to do the same technique and just match the transitions. So then add in a little bit of purple now and some orange to the mix. I'm just going to do the same for shadows. So I'm just imprinting sort of texture for shadows on the path. This could be sort of a muddy, sort of rustic path, I guess. So there we go. So it's all starting to take shape. Our landscape is starting to look fantastic. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of yellow to that mix. Tiny bit of the cad yellow deep hue and a little bit of green. And I'm trying to create the illusion of bark. So I'm trying to create a nice tone, and I'm going to start putting some highlights on my tree. Now I don't want them too light, because I'll show you if you have it too bright. So look, once I move my hand, it won't fit in with the sunlight. I want them quite silhouetted. So what I'm doing, I'm using a flat-headed brush. I'm leaving gaps in the underpainting to let some of the dark black shine through to create the illusion of bark. So as I say, I don't want it too bright, so I'm going to add some purple to the mix and some blue to cool it right down. So remember what I've just said about cooling things down. I'm just going to go over the top, and I'm just going to make it a little bit cooler in tone. So there we go. And I'm just going to do the same on this tree. So I'm using a flat-headed brush, or you could use a fine liner, and leave plenty of gaps in the underpainting so it gives the illusion of marks on the tree like bark. So just by creating little scrapes up the tree with this flat-headed brush, it just gives the added look of texture. And these are just on the edges that are getting the sunlight. So what's facing the sun, it's just got a little bit of a highlight on it. And then just go get pure black and add it to the mix. So a lot more black and a tiny bit of burnt sienna and blue, just to make a really dark colour. Tiny bit of crimson, burnt sienna, why not? Just heat it up a little bit. And I'm just going to paint back in that tree now. It's got a highlight. I'm just going to put the left hand side. So the side that's not facing the sun, I'm just going to make it a bit darker. So if you imagine one side of your tree is facing the sun and it's going to be lighter, and one side of your tree is going to be facing, have its almost back to the sunlight, so that's almost going to be like a silhouette. So all I'm doing is just going up the middle of the tree just to create the illusion of bark. So I'm going to get some pure black now, and some blue. And in the foreground, I'm going to make this tree, the shadows on it very dark, because this is right next to the viewer. So again, now we've got those nice texturized. I'm just making them almost little marks to create sort of ridges on the tree, little marks and divots, just to create texture to make it look more realistic. So we recently did the birch tree tutorial. That tutorial is fantastic if you want to know how to paint trees. Really easy. So all we're doing, look, we're just trying to create realism by having one part of the tree on the left hand side in the shade and have the other side in the highlights, and by just having little knocks and cracks on it, just gives that texturized look, just like the floor, just to create again the idea of realism. So there we go. And I'm going to get some of the sky colour, which was cerulean blue, cobalt blue and plenty of white. So do you remember the sky colour that we poked all these little holes in? So you can poke some more holes in just to make it look a little bit prettier. Why not? So just add in little holes. Now you can see it. And as I always say to you, if you take a step back from your work, so if you're sitting down, just get up and take a step back. You can just have a look at it from afar and just see where you need to work bits. And if you do too many holes, look, you can just put the colour that you have for your leaves and just fill them back in. So there's no bother. If you do make an accident and you get up and you go, oh, it looks a bit lopsided or something, just go back with the colour and just fill it back in. So all I'm doing, I'm using some of the sky tone, so it kind of looks like it's just a bit wet, like a little bits of puddles and stuff on the path. And what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to do some highlights just on the path in the foreground, just to sort of again bring the viewer into the painting, but also to teach you guys. So just we'll make some highlights, just why not, and we'll teach you. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of that bright yellow, which was cad yellow, predominantly white, and a tiny bit of orange I've just added into it, and I'm just going to add some highlights. So again, I'm just trying to create where the sun is coming down. It's creating sort of a shimmer effect, trying to always match the sunlight. And I'm going to take some of that bright matte orange and a really fine liner, and I'm just going to create little dots. So very, very time consuming, but not hard. By just holding my hand steady with my other hand, I can just create little dots. Now these can be all the sort of blades of grass and fallen leaves that are just hitting a bit of the sunlight and they're just picking up the colour. So if I zoom in for you, so as I say to you, it's not hard, it's just a little bit time consuming. So all we're going to do is just do lots and lots of little dots of bright orange. And these could be all just fallen leaves in the foreground, just to add to the texture. Just so it looks like they've fallen off the trees onto the path. And while that sun is beaming down, they're just picking up hints of the thing. And because it's very autumn related, it looks pretty. And it matches all our tones. So that orange is a little bit overwhelming. So we'll make it a bit more subtle in a minute because it's very, very bright. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix some orange and a little bit of purple. There we go, orange and purple. And I'm just going to sort of glaze over it a tiny bit just to make it less harsh. So I'm going to have some that are in the sunlight and some that aren't, just so some look like they're almost sparkling. Just making it just a little bit less harsh. So that's a great thing I keep saying to you about acrylics, you can just glaze areas. Now I'm just going to get some bright black, so I'm just going to get some pure black with no blue or burnt sienna in it now, and I'm just going to edge this left hand side just to bring it real into focus and real into the foreground, so bring it real close to the viewer. So again, I'm just using the flat headed brush and I'm just outlining the left hand side of it and just underneath it just to give it a shadow. And the same with this one, because this tree is again in the foreground, it's nearer to the viewer. So I'm just doing the outer side that's not getting any sunlight, so it's almost like a silhouette. And again, it's just to create a shadow and bring it towards the viewer. So just like all the other tutorials, we only want to use our darkest darks in the foreground nearest to the viewer, because it brings it real close to the person who's looking at the painting. So we want to keep our blacks right to the very end and have them right in the foreground. So I'm just using the edge of this fine brush just to make it look more realistic. And last but not least, I'm just getting some of that off yellowy white and I'm just going to soften this area. Now it's all dry, I'm just going to go over this branch so you can still see the branch, but it just looks like the sunlight is just beaming through it and it's just pushing it back again just a little bit more. I'm just going to get the same colour, which was white with a hint of yellow, and I'm just going to put some dots just so it looks like some of the leaves are just sparkling in the light, just where that sun is beaming through. So all I'm doing is just using that really bright tone, but again, just like what we just did with the orange, it's a bit overwhelming. So what we'll do is, while we've leathered it on, we'll just use some of the orange over the top, just so it blends in a bit nicer. So just by going back and forth and just having a lighter tone over your highlights, just to make them not so overwhelming, little trick. So there we go, just adding some orange over the top, just so it's just nice and pretty. It looks like the sun is coming down the path. So that is fantastic. God, what a gorgeous landscape. And then let's just get some of this gold and yellow and a little bit of orange, so some cad yellow deep hue and a tiny bit of the orange cad light. There we go, just to make a more sort of brighter colour. And we'll just merge the two colours just to make them more yellowy, just to match the sky in the background. And the transition should look perfect. And while I've got some bright white, I'm just going to soften this area up and just have a sparkling sun right at the top of the path, and it's a central focus point. So she's finished. So I've signed her in the left hand corner. So you've learned how to do a sky, how to draw people in by having a central point. We've got the darkened corners. You've learned how to do texture and a gradient in your leaves, and how to punch holes in the sky to create realism, to make your work look more realistic. We've created branches using a thin fine liner, and we've got darker in tree trunks as we've moved towards the viewer. You've learned how to do texture on things like grasses and leaves. So that is a fantastic autumn fall landscape painting. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. My name is Murray, and there should be more tutorials coming now on the right hand side or below. So thank you very much for watching, and take care, guys. See you soon. Bye.